Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first of a series of webinars on artificial intelligence in healthcare. I would like to give the floor to Constantina Remundu, a statistician performing research in predictive AI in healthcare. Constantina.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Stavros. I hope everyone can hear me well enough. So, in order to start, let me share my presentation one moment. Okay. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, hello from my side as well. I'm Konstantina Remondu, as already Stavros said. I'm a PhD candidate at National Technical University of Athens in the Electrical and Computer Engineer department. So, my background is actually on applied statistics for medical data in Athens University of Economic and Business. And today I'm going to present to you the role of causal inference in clinical decision-making through AI modeling and present the case study of predicting ICU readmissions. Okay. So starting with the challenge of decision-making in healthcare, which is a very crucial point for this presentation. Until now, the medical research has focused on evidence-based clinical practices, which means that the doctors and clinical medical staff were basing their decisions on this three-level practice called the evidence-based practice, which actually takes into account the clinical experience of the doctor and medical staff through their education and previous experience, the patient preferences, meaning that we have also had to take into account what the patient needs to be treated with, what medicine they should take, they want to take, what procedures they want to go through or not. And also the research evidence that was made through publications, through randomized controlled trials, and meta-analysis of results of those publications. Of course, this clinical decision-making had a lot of complexity because it is a dynamic and context-dependent process in which data should be collected, interpreted, and evaluated in order to select the most preferable and most and the best action for the patient. Clinical decision-making, of course, includes diagnosis, monitoring of a patient, intervention, like giving a specific drug or doing a specific procedure. But in order for the medical staff to be able to make a decision on what is best for the patient, they had to have the available information available, but there is always an uncertainty in doing so because there is a lack of information and data. And doctors also should take into account, except for what the patient wants, also the symptoms, the lab results, medical history, imaging, also comorbidities, and the social and psychological context of the patient. In order to be able to specify in the critical care unit, we will now present what the actual problem we face in admissions in the units are. The ICU readmission mostly follows the 10% of patients that already go into ICU. They will be readmitted, having a worse prognosis than before. And they will be admitted within the same hospital stay, meaning that they will not discharge from the hospital. They will just get into the ICU again. This is a massive red flag for many reasons, we will see later. But this is also have created the need for a more precise prediction for these occurrences. But in order to do so, we need more data, which is also a very difficult task in medical domain, because healthcare data, particularly in critical care settings, are very complex and heterogeneous, including a lot of different types of data like vital signs, laboratory results, clinical notes, and other type of imaging, and so on. Additionally to the heterogeneity of this data, we also come across some other problems like the missing data or incorrect reporting when the doctors report the results from the patients. Because, okay, when there is a need for action, sometimes some data may be forgotten to be reported, or the necessity of quick action makes incorrect inputs. Also because most of the times data are collected by sensors or other type of way, there might be a lot of noise, transcription discrepancies from different protocols. Also, the different clinical workflows that are used in the hospitals also create a very diverse technical quality of the data. And last but not least, the poor representation of specific population, because due to these different clinical workflows, other hospitals the hospitals collect the data with different ways, or other hospitals may collect the data, less data than others, or just because of poor economical state of a country, the collection is not as good or as good quality as they should be, in order for models to be able to predict and make a good job. So, as mentioned earlier, this has a lot of medical and patient implications, focusing firstly on psychological strength and stability that may worsen the outcomes of the patient himself. Also impacting on the mortality rates that may be increased. So keeping the patient in the right care environment ensures that they receive timely medication treatment and proper dosing. So this precision is what prevents adverse drug reactions, decreases complication before the start, and fundamentally accelerate recovery if it is done correctly. Also, another potential impact is the longer hospital stays that will not only delay recovery, but also increase the risk of hospital-acquired complication or diseases. So accurate prediction of admissions and discharges decision ensure that the patient goes to the correct department of the hospital or the ICU in the correct time, and improves overall survival rates, while preventing the mislocation of highly limited critical care beds and overall resources of the hospital. which leads to the financial burden grow, of course, if there are a lot of errors in the accuracy of the admissions, because for both patients and healthcare systems, of course. So if we focus on a more evidence-based decision, we are not only solving a single medical issue, but we are driving down overarching healthcare costs while maximizing safety across entire institution of healthcare. Okay, so moving on. The next section of this presentation will be about how AI is currently using predictive modeling for ICU readmissions, and what we have learned so far by the review on AI models used for ICU readmissions made for 24 studies was that the most models usually used are the LSTM, the BERT, the recurrent neural networks, and some GRU-based models. Those models actually showed a very good AUROC score of LSTM being in 0.72, which is very promising results. Also, the meta-analysis of some of these studies also showed an AUROC of 0.79. However, what was observed is that these studies had a very high heterogeneity and between each other and inside the studies themselves. Also, what resulted from this review, from this study of the 24 separated studies using AI models, was those 4 issues that are shown in this slide. Firstly, being the lack of technical reproducibility, which meant that most of the studies did not have an available code in order to be reproduced to different data sets and so on, to see how these models adjust or react to different information. If I'm not corrected, only 3 out of the 24 had the code available. So this made a huge impact on the generalization of the study. Also, the lack of conceptual reproducibility, because most of the models, the vast majority of the models, actually used data sets that came from US-based settings. And there was no exploration of how these US-derived models perform internationally, despite being other available data sets worldwide. So this is also a generalization problem. This also adds to the generalization problem because we cannot see how these models, these AI models will adjust or perform to different kinds of data sets. The third and one of the most crucial issues faced was, of course, the explainability of the deep learning models used and the so-called black box nature that, of course, can limit trustworthiness. In general, a deep learning model might output a 90% risk of readmission, but cannot explain its reasoning to the authentic physician. The physician will ask why this result has occurred, but the model will not be able to answer. Even though there are some techniques used in order to give some answer to that problem, like SAP and LINE, only 2 studies out of the 24 reviewed here has been used those techniques in order to give an explanation of the model's output. And last but not least, we have the high heterogeneity, as we already said, that did not only occurred between the 24 studies, but also inside the 24 studies, or each one of the study, due to the different study settings, to the different data sources that each the different hospitals or the different workflows they used, the different architectures each study used. So it was impossible to define a best, let's say, model in order to be able to have a more generalized output. So, of course, as we said, one of the main problems we face in when we're talking about AI models is the black box problem. Because in the previous 4 issues, we will here in this presentation, we will focus on the 3rd and 4th. So the black box problem, as of course I'm sure you already know, it's how these systems are not able to answer the what-if question. They cannot answer, they cannot understand, interpret, or trace how complex machine models transforms input into specific outcomes, how we come from the raw data to a single answer. This, of course, has a lot of problems in the appliance of these models, starting from the reliability, because people cannot trust something they cannot explain, and especially in healthcare settings, where doctors need to know, as we already said, need to have an evidence-based action in order to use. So, for example, let's say that we have a vehicle, an autonomous vehicle, and it crashes through to a pedestrian, and the system cannot tell us why it did that. This turned out to be that the perception of the system somewhere made a mistake, or at least it was some kind of bias, but we cannot say where this problem occurred from. So it is difficult for doctors or for people using the system to be able to trust it. Of course, this can happen, as we said, from concealed biases, because the datasets might be might be unfair to a specific population, have less data for some population, and so on, making them not be able to be generalized and not to be able to create results when we are talking about rare conditions or rare diseases once we talk about healthcare. And can also have a huge problem on regulation and ethics, because the question of why we used this instead of that cannot be answered. Of course, as we already mentioned, there are a couple of approaches already taken into place in the literature in order to be able to tackle this problem of explainability. The one approach is the feature extraction. It's mostly used for less complex algorithms like XBoost or XGBoost and random forest, like tree-based algorithms, and they can highlight the parts of the input that contribute most to the final output. So they take the features that played the most role and give from the algorithm and give a percentage of how they contributed. And there is also the approach of explainability AI techniques like CAM, SAP, or LIME, or auto-encoders that uses a 5-step approach in order to be assessed and in order to be used specifically for the AI model that include the states, the applicability model, the scope, the form, and the type. Of course, the problem with these approaches, as well as with the AI models used, the traditional AI models used for prediction, is they only explain and compute correlations. So again, the answer of evidence-based or the what-if question cannot be answered, yet at least. So here comes the causal revolution, let's say AI, the causal inference, in order to answer to this what-if question. Based on Hopkins and Pearl, causality, it actually can be defined as a relationship between an event called the cause and another event called the effect, where the cause brings about the effect that directly influences its occurrence. So it's the exact relationship between, of course, let's say A and B, that A can cause B at most of the times. As we saw in the first slides, medical research had already tried to use causality through clinical trials, because in clinical trials, what is done is actually separate the patients into two groups, the control group and the treatment group, while controllably change the variable that wants to see if it makes any difference, to see the cause. If the cause is a treatment like a drug, they want to see if this drug can cause any the patient to get better or not. By this way, they manage to manage bias and confounders, since the only changeable, let's say, the only variable that changes is the variable in scope, the drug. And that leads to evidence-based practices. If a lot of clinical trials show the same result, we can safely say that the drug has caused for the patient to get better. So this is not actually a very last occurrence. It has happened since the early 20th century with Ronald Fisher working on randomized experiments and Neyman development of potential outcomes framework. This is also very important because this framework was used later on the algorithms and procedures we use now for causality. In the mid-20th century, Sewell Wright's work on structural equation modeling also helped with the calculus of how this is done mathematically. And in the late 20th century, Judea Pearl's work on directed axial graphs was also implemented, along with the Bradford-Hill criteria of causation that actually made the criteria that define what causality means and how can it be obtained. Statistically, because we already saw two contexts here, one being correlation and one being causality, statistically, it is important not never mind. Statistically, it's important to know what means what. What is the difference between correlation and causation? Because both of them are used in order to predict future outcomes in modeling. So correlation, as you know, is a statistical measure, actually, that computes how two variables move together. If we change variable A, we'll also make we also observe that B changes as well, either on the same direction or the opposite direction. And this can be seen more clearly through an example, as we have here on the right side of the slide, which actually observes or studies the correlation between the coffee and the heart disease. If we don't take into account the confounding variable seen below, the cigarette smoking, we can easily conclude that coffee correlates with heart disease, that those who drink coffee most probably will also have heart disease. But this is not the actual case, because a lot of people who drink coffee actually like to have a smoke at the same time, which is the actual cause of heart disease. So cigarette can be a hidden confounding variable that will, if we don't take it into account, will lead us to wrong results. Causality, on the other hand, is a direct mechanism that where variable A causes variable B, which means that changing variable A will predictably change B. It's always A comes before B in time, always, so it can cause B. Forecasting, of course, is the use of past data where correlation or causal inference is used in order to estimate future outcomes. So correlation causality is, let's say, two different approaches in order to predict the future outcome. Okay, another timeline of the progression, let's say, of causality in AI. I don't want to take a lot of time in this. However, we see that the actual application of causality in AI systems started from the 70s with Bayesian networks, moved to the 80s with causal discovery algorithm like PC algorithm, and the formalization of potential outcomes framework through counterfactuals. Later on in the 90s, as we already saw earlier, Perls created the DAGs. Moving to today, let's say, which created a vast need for more causal discovery and algorithms through observational data because of the COVID, and the use of causality in many other different fields like causal fairness methods, like combination of diverse data sets in order to see how the causality comes from diverse data sets and so on. Of course, based on that, in order to be able to have a more concrete and more understandable workflow, let's say, to use causality, Perls has also introduced with the ladder of causation, which is a three-level approach, actually, starting with level one, which speaks about association. And here the main question, the core question, is how would seeing X will change my belief in Psi. This is actually what we are calling correlation. The first level, of course, is correlation. We need to see firstly what is happening in a more observatory level, what we observe from our data. This is also can be done by calculating conditional probabilities, like given that the patient took a drug, what is the probability they recover? But the next level is the level of intervention, is the level when in RCTs, in randomized controlled trials, would give the drug to the medicine to the patient in order to see if they will get better. So in this level, because we keep all the other confounders in a more controlled environment, we can move beyond correlation by disrupting the original relationship and start to understand the cause and effect, because we only change the variable we believe it's the cause. And last, we have the level 3, the counterfactuals, which here is the opposite procedure, actually, what happens here. Given that the patient took the drug and died, what is the probability they would have lived had they not taken the drug? That's the core question. It actually is what would happen if we did not do the action, if we did do the action. So as you may understand, this is the complete inverse procedure. And it involves a reasoning that includes abduction, action, and prediction. This can be done through the structural causal model, which we'll see later in this presentation as well. But before going to the models, to the structural causal models, we need to have a better understanding of what the causal relationships are within our data. This is actually the level 2 of the previous ladder, because level 1, we said it's the correlation, it's what the model will give us without causality. So level 2 is the directed acyclic graphs, which, as you can see, are networks, are simple networks that have nodes as the variables we observe, and edges as the connections between those variables. The connections, the edges are directed, as you can see by the image here, which denoted as arrows going from the one node to another. Also, the acyclic name in the acyclic word in the name means there are no loops, there are no directed loops within this graph, and what we can actually see here, what we can actually interpret from here is that we have a map, a blueprint of how the exposure outcome relationship can be depicted from confounding variables, exposures of interest, and mediating variables. We can see which variable lead directly or indirectly through causal inference to the outcome. Of course, this cannot be done by just we have to observe the data we have, and we have to use causal discovery algorithms to estimate the edges. Like we saw earlier, the PC algorithm is one of them, and another known is the FCA. We'll see later on more details. An example of this directed acyclic graph we can see here. This is actually a graph that creates a cause and effect with the exposure of being the tooth loss and the outcome to be mortality, which is, of course, a weird connection, but let's see how this can be translated. As you can see, it says here that the biasing paths are open, which means that with this kind of variables we have, the traditional correlation will create a high correlated effect between tooth loss and mortality. However, through the this DAG example, we have computed two million adjustment sets for estimating the direct effect of tooth loss on mortality. One of them is the age, alcohol, diabetes, obesity, psychosocial, sex and smoking and sport, and the other is age, alcohol, periodontitis, psychosocial, sex and smoking. In order to understand this more precisely, we can see in the graph that almost all of these variables, except for periodontitis maybe, are ancestors of exposure and outcomes at the same time, which means that they both do cause tooth loss. I mean, both sets cause tooth loss and both sets cause mortality. Showing that why the correlation in these two variables may be high, even though not logical. After finishing with the DAG, which, as we said, it's at the level 2 of the ladder, we can now go to the level 3 of actually computing structural causal models in order to see and to estimate the effect that this causality has to our final output. As it says here, structural causal models play the role of the bridge between statistical observation and causal intervention. We see how what we observed can be interpreted into action. These models can manage intervention, counterfactual, and transportability. Intervention through Pearl's do calculus, we can make what we explained later as what the controlled trials did separately. We can do it with mathematics and answer to what happens if I increase the dose, or what happens if I give if I don't give the medicine. The other ones, the counterfactuals, as we said, they allow the AI model to answer the question, the patient was readmitted to ICU, would the same thing happen if we have delayed the discharge by 24 hours? And lastly, the transportability. Based on these models, this information is more easily being transferred from one hospital to the other, even though they use different workflows or different reporting systems, because we now know the original causes of what is happening on the population. So in order to take this all information and put it into action and see what is actually is happening, we will use the ICU readmission use case. And in order to do so, we took the data from the MIMIC4 dataset. The MIMIC4 dataset actually consists of data from more than 364 patients, 64,000 patients, from which more than 65,000 patients were admitted to an ICU, and over 300,000 patients were admitted to an emergency department. Of course, we are more focused on the ICU admitted patients. The age of these patients were over 18 years old, and both male and female patients were equally represented in the dataset, 52% versus 47-48. The complexity of this dataset, as you can see, is very high. However, what I want to highlight is that we had 3 different admission types, 3 different patient types, let's say. ICU admissions is a subset of hospital admission, which is a subset of an overall patients that were included in these datasets. So you will see that we will mostly focus on ICU and hospital admissions here. And the mortality, let's say, of the patients, the total deaths that were observed in overall patient was 38,301. The in-hospital death, which means that the patients that died that were actually was admitted in the hospital were 11,800. And the ICU-associated deaths, meaning that we counted only the deaths from the patients that were admitted at least once in ICU, were 9,602. From specifically the ICU admission to patients, the 60,000 had more than one readmissions. More than one, meaning that two or more, okay, not only one. So before we start to actually compute causality and put it in our models, we have to take a look, we have to observe a little bit closer of our data. So we saw that the gender was equally distributed. However, it's not the same case for the age. In the age distribution, as we can see here, in the hospital admissions, which is in the left side of this slide, we can see that there is a uniformity more or less, but more patients are between the 18 to 25-year-old patients, which is contradicts with what we see in the ICU distribution of age, which we see patients over 60 years old being more admitted to ICU. This, even though it seems to affect the ICU admission and readmission of the patients, can be considered a confounder in the meaning that the ICU population we have is more older. So our model will definitely use this information in order to increase the probability of someone being readmitted if it's an older age. But the age is not, it's a biological procedure. We cannot take the age as a specific cause of readmission yet. Next table here shows the comparison between the admissions of patients from different races. Actually, the dataset had a more complicated clustering of what the race was like, but we made a more distinguished category, having Asian, Hispanic, Latino, Black, White, and the unknown. Well, we see in our dataset, the white Caucasians, let's say, race had the vast majority of patients in hospital and in ICU admissions, which makes maybe the dataset a bit more biased based on race, since it is representative of more of the white people. So again, because with the same reason as we had with the age, we cannot take this as a correlated, let's say, variable in order to define whether someone will be readmitted in an ICU or not. This slide also will show that the distribution of length of stay within an ICU on the different ICUs. The problem here is that, as you can see on the top of the table, there is some units that have a very long stays, but these units, as well as those who mention intermediate or step down, are not actually the ICUs we have in scope here, because intermediate, step down, and PAC, let's say, are intermediate units used after a surgery or when they have a downgrade from an ICU. So they mention them as critical care units, but has not actually the same scope as, let's say, ICU or neurosurgical intensive care unit, and so on. This also can cause bias, because as we see, some of these days are very high, the mean days, actually an average, and that can cause unfairness and bias and wrong results to our model. But the most important table is this one, because as you can see here, we have collected the top 9, let's say, or top 10 of the diseases observed in the patients. We have actually sorted them from the most seen one in an ICU unit. The circled column, it's it's what is actually sorted. So we can see that sepsis and septicemia has the vast majority of it's in the vast majority of the patients. And another great observation here is that almost all the patients that are in the ICU with this specific disease were also admitted in the hospital in the same numbers. Let's say that someone was admitted in the hospital with sepsis, they most probably get into the ICU as well, as you can see by the numbers. Also, the last column is also very important, since we measure there the patients that had a second readmission or more to the ICU, which we'll see in some cases almost half of the patients. So in order to train the model, we made some pre-processing, okay, and in order to decrease the computational cost and in order to have more interpretable results. So the missing values were managed with strict complete case analysis, meaning that we dropped records with missing variables, because in causal analysis, we cannot use any missing field value with other numbers or average numbers or some other technique that may cause destruction of our actual causal analysis. We also removed the long-term specialized yards that did not actually had the same scope as in our analysis. We only kept the precise care units, critical care units. We also removed patients that eventually died, because as we will see later, death is also a competitive outcome. meaning that we neither can use it as a cause, of course, of readmission, because dying cannot cause readmission, and also cannot use it as a readmission itself, because it's very different from our scope. So the final cohort size was a little bit over 80,000 specific patients, while the distribution was almost 12,000 not readmission to 6,000 readmissions. So putting this data into our XGBoost model, without the causality yet, we have concluded to a model that gave our ROC of 0.7, which is a very good fit and very different to the random prediction that we try to go away from. And we can see through the feature extraction that the most focused, the variable that mostly affected the outcome was the total diagnosis, the clinical complexity, if we can say it otherwise, meaning that the more different diagnosis diseases a patient have achieved, the more probable it is to be readmitted. Also, we can see in this table that a high feature correlation was observed for the hospital loss, the age, and some care units that we have included. So this is a good first example based on correlation to see how the model what the model have achieved. Of course, in the table on the top left, we can see also the precision and the recall, which based for real data, it's not that bad. This is actually what the ladder of causation mentions as level 1. We see here the correlation between observed in our dataset. The second level, as we said earlier, is the DAG. We used the PC algorithm here in order to structure the DAG. And as you can see in the graph, there is the nodes and the edges, the ICU readmission, the outcome variables on the left. Firstly, one thing we firstly observe is that the age directly causes ICU readmission, hospital length of stay, and total diagnosis, meaning the clinical complexity we said earlier, which is logical if you think about it. The other one is that sepsis also causes total diagnosis and hospital loss, length of stay. And we also see that the dotted line there actually shows that there is a connection between sepsis and ICU length of stay. However, the algorithm could not estimate how these relationships work if the sepsis actually causes the length of stay or the length of stay actually causes sepsis. Most probably the data were not sufficient enough in order to be able to make this connection. This is also very logical if you think about it, because most of the times, if someone stays in the ICU long enough, he may obtain some diseases from the hospital. Lastly, we see that the total diagnosis actually creates a bridge that collects causes from sepsis and age and ICU length of stay, and directly links that to the ICU readmission. However, PC algorithm, the problem with PC algorithm is that that doesn't take account any hidden confounders. So it computes direct causalities without that assumption. So here comes the FCI algorithm that actually takes into consideration also hidden confounders. You can see in the legend of the graph that we have 3 different types of edges here. The one is the direct causality, which is denoted as the black line, the hidden confounder with a red curved line, and the uncertainty with the blue dotted lines. So in this graph, what we can see again is that the total diagnoses have a direct cause to readmission. And the other one, more or less, are the same, except that we have now the hidden confounders that before we saw that with the PC algorithm, we saw that the age has a direct link to total diagnosis. Here we can see that the link is has some hidden confounder, which is logical. Age comes with a biological traits as well that we have not compute here, we have not taken into account. So these algorithms found that and showed us that. Again, ICU length of stay, because it is mentioned very much that this length of stay can cause readmission, has some also confounding variables hidden there. So the red lines are the lines that we need to have into our mind where we are talking about causality and how this affects the readmission of the patient. Now, the next step is to take this knowledge and put it into our causal models by computing an average treatment effect. Here, for both models, we see on the left side, the table is the PC-aware classification report, and in the right, we have the FCI-aware classification report. Both algorithms gave a model with an average treatment effect of 0.22, and both had a successful refute assessment, which uses the placebo treatment like in the RCTs, that shows no significant difference between the placebo and what we had here. So as we can see here, as we can see here, for the feature importance that came out of this, the total diagnosis actually gained a lot more trust in causality-wise, meaning that the more diagnosis a patient had will cause a more likely probability to be readmitted. We see that most of the feature importances between the two algorithms are the same, except for the last one, which PC has given the coronary artery disease, while the FCA has given age. Okay, this is because of the observation of the data available we had. The precision is actually a little bit better than we had. Precision and recall is a bit better. Of course, the recall for readmitted is lower here and here, as you can see, because this is not very bad for the algorithm, because in healthcare we need to be able to be more precise about who will not readmit it, and not to be able to do mistakes and not readmit someone that needed to be readmitted. So it is not very bad for the algorithms. But we can see that both these algorithms agree with it. We have the total diagnosis as the main indicator that someone will be readmitted, as we also had from the traditional XGBoost model. In order for us to understand a little bit more how this is taken into interpretation, how this will help the doctor, the medical staff. Let's say we have a patient, or a male patient, 68-year-old, who was admitted through the emergency department for sepsis in the ICU. Current status is that he's stabilizing after 3 days, and the clinical complexity is 19 concurrent diagnosis. The standard machine learning algorithm will say that, okay, the length of stay is normal, he's stabilizing, he comes from an emergency department. He's 68 years old, he's on the high risk maybe for readmission, but not that much. He may say that the patient is low risk, we can discharge him. What the actual causal model will do is that will flag the more than 18 diagnosis threshold. He will predict the high risk and will suggest to hold him for 24 more hours. He will add the ATE, the effect of treatment, the percentage of that to the overall risk, and will flag him as high risk. So, finishing with that, what we have taken as lessons learned is, firstly, the illusion of perfect accuracy, the data linkage, as we say, that happens within the models, is that many of the times datasets include some variables like overall hospital length of stay, or like other administrative markers like next stay, as proxies, as target proxies that actually give away the answer and make the models, let's say, cheat on the output. Of course, this is not happening in causal AI modeling. And we have to address it, of course, beforehand in order to be able to get more precise outputs. Also, we learned that we have to address competitive risks like death, which, as we said, we cannot either take him as a readmission event, nor as a non-readmission, because sometimes if we include the death within our data, the patient, if he dies, will not be readmitted into an ICU. He will not have any other data recorded. So the model may take this as a non-readmission, which is also wrong for the analysis. The symptoms versus causes that happens a lot is when, let's say, the length of stay is taken as a cause for the ICU readmission problem, but it is not a cause, it is a symptom, because when someone is readmitted, more days are added to his record. So we are not sure which causes what yet, and also have to be taken into account. Of course, the clinical complexity, as we saw from the three models, is what is the main cause of readmission. which all of these lessons results to that we have definitely, if not only use causality in machine learning, that we have to also use parallel use of the causal-aware machine learning in order to have evidence-based and actual physiological failures over administrative noise, not to take account the administrative noise. Of course, in this research, in this analysis, we must acknowledge some limitations, like having working only on structured tabular data and not taking into account imaging or text notes or other type of available information. This will be added as a future iteration, including also more complex models, more causal graphs in order to extract causal graphs and estimations. And the end result will be to hopefully be able to integrate this and the treatment effect scores into actionable real-time risk dashboards directly into records of hospitals. That's it from my side. I don't know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Konstantina. This was a very interesting presentation. We are all looking forward to learning more about your research. Questions and answers will not be recorded now for legal reasons mainly, but the recording will be uploaded to the Network of Excellence we are working for, ENFIELD. Its YouTube channel has even more material for anyone who wishes to learn more, along with the researchers' contact info for anyone who wishes to delve in this subject. So the recording will now end. And again, thank you very much, Konstantina. Congratulations.